Okay, picture this. You step off a plane and everything just feels off, you know? The
Hmm.
signs look different, the noises are weird, even how people walk seems, I don't know, unfamiliar.
Hmm.
You've left behind everything comfortable, your language, your routine, maybe even how you grab a coffee. There's definitely that buzz of excitement, right?
Absolutely.
But maybe just underneath, there's a little bit of anxiety.
Nerves.
Exactly, that feeling, that mix of, wow, this is amazing, and whoa, this is strange. That's really what we're exploring today.
Yeah.
It's that core experience when you dive into a totally different culture, whether you've moved your whole life or you're just seeing your own home differently after being away. So we've gathered quite a bit of material for this deep dive.
Yeah.
Studies, articles, but also some really personal, really honest stories from people who've lived it.
Yeah, those personal accounts are powerful.
We want to get into what actually happens when your own way of seeing the world bumps up against completely new ways of living, thinking, doing things.
So our mission, really, is to unpack these huge transitions.
Yeah.
See what they teach us about the world? Yeah, but also, maybe more importantly, about ourselves.
Okay, so let's start with that classic term everyone uses, culture shock.
Right. And it gets a bad rap sometimes, like it's just about feeling miserable or homesick.
Yeah.
But the sources we looked at describe it as something more complex. It's a psychological response, really, to adjusting to a whole new cultural playground.
And interestingly, it often kicks off feeling pretty good.
Totally, that initial honeymoon phase.
Right. Everything's shiny new. One person talked about landing in Australia at 16 and just being completely over the moon. Fascinated by the clothes, the music, the food. It all felt so cool and exotic.
You're seeing it all with fresh eyes, maybe even through rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah.
It's the novelty that grabs you.
That feeling doesn't stick around forever, does it?
Not usually. As that same person found out, it tends to shift. It moves into what researchers call the negotiation phase.
Okay, negotiation phase. What does that feel like?
Well, that's when the day-to-day reality starts to sink in. And those differences that seem charming at first, they start feeling less charming and more, well, difficult.
Okay. So that's where the confusion, maybe the frustration, and definitely the homesickness starts to creep in.
Exactly. That Australian student, for instance, felt it after about 2 months. Little things started to feel just odd. Not
Yeah.
bad, just not right.
Hmm.
Missing friends and family really started to hurt. Getting frustrated because maybe your English isn't quite good enough for what you want to say.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Or longing for something really specific and comforting from home, like proper bread, as they put it. Or just wishing the buses ran the way you expect them to.
It's those little things adding up, isn't it? The stuff you never even thought about back home, suddenly they're different and require, like, mental energy.
So much mental energy.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not a clear step-by-step thing. The sources really stress that these phases blur together. You can feel like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Right.
It's pretty much seen as an unavoidable part of any big cultural move.
Yeah.
Actually, just accepting that it's going to happen can help quite a bit.
Okay, so let's dig into some specifics then. Because it's not just the big, obvious things like jobs or visas. Sometimes it's the small, surprising stuff that really throws you.
Well, absolutely. That's what makes these stories so rich. Like, there was this story of a Japanese teenager visiting an expat family in Kobe.
What?
Her first shock.
Yeah.
Just how big their house was.
Yeah.
So much space compared to what she was used to.
Huh. Just the physical space.
Yeah. And then something totally everyday for the hosts, like getting Kraft mac and cheese.
Yeah.
For her, a
Uh-huh.
completely strange new food.
Wow, mac and cheese. But that same story had a much deeper layer too, didn't it? About cultural norms.
It really did. She mentioned to the family that her father had been physically abusive, which tragically was somewhat normalized in her background,
Okay.
and their reaction was immediate. You can sue him. Exactly. For her, that idea of suing your own parent for abuse was just mind-blowing. Completely outside her frame of reference. It shows how culture shock goes way beyond just different foods or house sizes. It hits fundamental beliefs about family, justice, what's even possible.
That's a powerful example. It really shows how our culture shapes our whole understanding of the world.
It really does. Okay, shifting gears a bit, we also saw examples in the workplace. An Australian moving to the Netherlands
Right.
found the whole 1-year temporary contract thing pretty jarring at first. Apparently it's common there, often like a real trial period before they offer a permanent job.
But coming from maybe a different system, it feels insecure.
Yeah, exactly. It feels uncertain. And then the sick leave, that was a big one.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
So in Australia, maybe you get, what, 10 paid sick days a year.
Sounds about right.
In the Netherlands, we read that employees can get at least 70% of their pay for up to 2 years if they're sick. And that includes mental health, like burnout or serious stress.
Two?
Yeah, it's a massive difference. Speaks volumes about a different cultural take on employer responsibility and worker well-being.
That's incredible. What else came up in the work context?
Well, smaller things too, but
Sure.
important for fitting in. Like the real effort people expected you to make to pronounce Dutch names correctly. Seems small, but it matters.
Mm-hmm. Respect.
Right. And businesses just shutting down for 3 or 4 weeks in the summer for holidays.
Wow, the whole company.
Often, yeah. And mothers typically heading back to work maybe around 3 months after giving birth, which is different from, say, the 12 months that might be more common in Australia. It reflects different systems, but also different cultural views on work-life balance, family leave.
It's not all jarring shocks, though, right? Some experiences were surprisingly positive.
Oh, definitely. The sources mention unexpected kindness, too, like some travelers in Brazil.
Yeah.
They got taken in by a stranger's family, basically treated like long-lost relatives.
Yeah.
The family was genuinely worried the travelers were missing their own mothers.
Oh, that's sweet.
And then they got a surprise helicopter ride over the city. Just pure, spontaneous generosity. Speaks to a certain cultural warmth, maybe.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, what about just daily life stuff? The little routines.
Oh, tons of those.
Mm.
Like having to pay for public toilets in Austria or
Oh,
even paying
yeah.
for water at a restaurant in Barcelona.
Yeah.
Things you just assume are free if you're from the U.S., for example.
Right. Or tea. Different tea culture.
Exactly. China, with the traditional leaves, maybe constantly sipping.
Mm-hmm.
Then Italy, maybe it's tea bags, more of an afternoon break thing. Simple, but different rhythms.
And the German honor system came up, like leaving
Yeah.
hostel keys out or someone sending maps before you'd even paid.
Yeah, that level of trust can be surprising. Contrasted with, say, how fast they whip you through the grocery checkout in Germany
That's right.
versus the really slow pace of meals in places like Spain or Italy or Argentina, where sitting and chatting for ages after you eat is just
Yeah.
part of it, which can feel really rushed if you're used to North American efficiency, maybe.
Vending machines in Japan, I read about that. They're everywhere.
Everywhere, selling everything, even hot soup or coffee, and the habit of carrying a little hand towel with you.
Oh, interesting.
Small bath towels in Korea, but then finding these huge hotel bathtubs in Seoul, which isn't typical for East Asia generally. Little contradictions.
What else? Buying cigarettes or alcohol in weird places in the U.S., like pharmacies? That's unheard of in Australia, apparently.
Right. Or British understatement. Someone saying they're feeling poorly might mean they're actually seriously unwell.
You have to learn the code.
Totally.
Okay.
And the queuing thing in the UK, the tedding, instead of saying something directly.
Classic. And the 2 separate taps for hot and cold water. Still a thing.
Apparently so. Or toilets, lighter flush pressure in England versus really high water levels in U.S. toilets. Weird little details you notice.
And drying clothes outside. So common globally, but maybe seen as unusual in the U.S. where dryers are king.
And that slightly terrifying detail from Africa having to iron clothes dried outside sometimes to kill insect eggs.
Yikes. Okay. Hadn't heard that one.
Even finding a public garbage can be different street to street, country to country. Or how much infrastructure is built just for cars in the U.S., making walking hard.
Even getting basic necessities can be a shock, like needing a pharmacist for stuff you just grab off the shelf back home.
Yeah, definitely. Outside the U.S., lots of over-the-counter meds need a pharmacist chat. And the actual medicines available might be totally different brands or formulations.
Someone had a nightmare trying to buy contact lens solution in Paris.
Right. And another person needing a prescription or at least a pharmacist consult just for ibuprofen in Greece. So different from buying a big bottle easily elsewhere.
And then the flip side, like controlled substances being sold openly in some resort areas in Mexico, that's a different kind of shock.
And the social stuff can be confronting too, like the experience of being stared at incessantly as a foreigner in India, especially if you're white.
Right, that must feel intense.
Yeah, and sometimes it goes beyond staring, maybe people touching you, asking for photos
Yeah.
without asking permission first. It's likely not meant aggressively, but it comes from really different ideas about personal space, privacy, how you interact with strangers.
And maybe different ways of reacting to visible poverty or suffering you might see on the street.
Exactly. It all adds up.
Okay, so when you put all these pieces together, the big challenges, the small daily frictions, what's the overall impact on the person going through it, psychologically, emotionally?
It takes a toll. The sources consistently mention a whole range of feelings. Anxiety,
Oh,
definitely. Suddenly worrying about things you never gave a second thought to before. Food safety,
yeah.
social rules, how you're dressed, privacy,
Yeah.
confusion, frustration, getting easily irritated. Loneliness is a huge one. And sometimes actual depression,
And homesickness. That came up again and again.
dominantly. Like maybe it takes over your evenings, that longing for home. It's this constant background noise of trying to reduce uncertainty.
You're always mentally working, aren't you?
Always. Figuring out language, housing, transport, money, new social rules, new values. It's exhausting.
Mm.
And the research confirms it. One study mentioned over 80% of international students face significant psychological adjustment challenges.
80%. That's huge.
It really is. And it highlights how tough it can be.
Mm.
There was one story that really stuck with me. Someone who got a knee injury while abroad.
Okay.
Now, they'd struggled with anxiety and depression before, but this situation just amplified everything. Being physically stuck, far from home, far from their usual support network.
Oh, wow.
They described feeling trapped, completely alone, hitting rock bottom, even fearing they might die because help felt so inaccessible. It just shows how vulnerable you can be when you're navigating a new culture and facing another crisis on top of it.
That's intense. It really underscores the isolation.
It does. Interestingly, one study we saw suggested women might report feeling culture shock more intensely than men. Yeah, but that same study found no real difference between genders in terms of overall psychological adjustment or well-being in the long run. So maybe it's about how we experience or express the shock rather than the ultimate impact. It's an interesting nuance.
Okay, so given how tough this can all be, how do people actually cope? How do they get through it?
Well, the sources offered some really practical advice and some deeper insights, too.
What's step one?
Often it's just acceptance, like we mentioned earlier, realizing that feeling disoriented and challenged is culture shock. It's normal, it has a name, and lots of people experience it. That itself can be a bit of a relief.
Right, you're not alone in feeling this way.
Exactly. Then come the practical strategies. Actively trying to connect with people, making friends. Even if your language skills are shaky and it feels awkward, just trying.
Putting yourself out there.
Yeah, and building some kind of routine. That helps bring a little structure and predictability into a situation that can feel chaotic.
Makes sense.
And, really importantly, using stress relief tools that worked for you back home, whatever that is, yoga, running, walks, art, music, talking to friends and family online, bringing those familiar comforts into the new setting,
And trying to keep a positive attitude. Easier said than done sometimes, I bet.
for sure. But trying to see the good aspects, finding humor in the frustrations, learning to laugh at getting the wrong bus again instead of just getting angry, that helps resilience.
So those are coping skills. What about adapting more deeply?
That involves a shift in mindset, not just battling the differences, but trying to understand them, asking why things are done differently here.
Getting curious instead of critical.
Exactly. Recognizing that, as one source put it, often there is a valid reason for why things are the way they are, even if it's not your way. It's about developing empathy for the new culture.
And that process changes you, right? It
Yeah.
broadens your horizons.
Absolutely. It helps you learn to negotiate between different cultures, as someone said. You start seeing that there isn't just one right way to do things. You become more flexible.
And for dealing with the specific psychological strain.
Well, the advice points towards standard stress management techniques, focusing on solving concrete problems where you can, like finding better housing or enrolling in language classes. That's problem-focused coping.
Okay.
And also managing the emotions themselves, like dealing with homesickness or anxiety. That's emotion-focused coping. Seeking social support is huge. Connecting with other expats who get it, or friendly locals, and using counseling services if they're available, especially at universities.
Okay, so you've navigated the arrival, the shocks, you've found ways to cope. Maybe you're even starting to feel settled, like you belong.
Yeah.
But the journey's not over for a lot of people, is it? There's the going home part.
Ah, yes. The return trip.
Hmm.
And the often very surprising challenge of reverse culture shock.
Which happens to almost everyone who's been away for a significant time.
Pretty much universally, yeah. The main reason is simple. While you were immersed in another culture, you changed. Your experiences shifted, your identity, your values, how you see the world.
Right.
But when you get back, your home environment, the place, the people might feel like it's exactly the same, like it's frozen in time from when you left.
And that creates a weird disconnect.
A huge disconnect. You feel different, but everyone back home might still relate to the old you. It can make you feel like, yeah, a stranger in your own land.
Does it follow similar stages to the initial culture shock?
Often, yes. People talk about a W curve model. There's maybe a brief honeymoon period being back home, happy to see familiar faces and places.
Okay.
But then comes a dip, a crisis phase, where you feel out of sync, misunderstood, maybe critical of your home culture, followed by, hopefully, recovery and readjustment.
There's a story about a Canadian returning from Japan.
Yeah, that really illustrated it well. She described feeling like a total foreigner in Canada. Relationships felt off because her friends and family hadn't shared her transformative experiences in Japan, and they treated her like the person she was before she left.
That must be frustrating.
Totally. And on top of that emotional stuff, she suddenly had to deal with practical adulting things in North America, like health insurance, finding an apartment, car troubles, things she hadn't needed to manage in the same way while living abroad. It just added layers of stress.
So the emotional impact can be pretty significant too. Irritability, loneliness.
Definitely. Irritability, feeling down or anxious, loneliness, confusion about your own identity. Who am I now? The intensity often depends on how long you were gone and how deeply you connected with the other culture. The more you changed, the bigger the potential bump when you return.
So how do you cope with that? Coming home, shock?
Similar principles apply, but focused on reintegrating back home. Mentally preparing yourself before you leave the host country helps managing expectations about what returning will actually be like.
Right, it might not be the perfect homecoming you imagine.
Exactly. And connecting with other people who have also lived abroad and returned is crucial. They get it in a way others might not.
Finding your tribe.
Yeah. General social support, counseling if needed, processing your experiences through journaling or talking it out. It's all about gradual reintegration and giving yourself grace.
Okay, so after navigating all this, the initial shock, the adaptation, maybe the reverse shock, what's the payoff? What do you actually gain from going through these really intense cultural transitions?
Well, the sources are pretty clear that despite the challenges, or maybe because of them, there's tremendous positive growth.
Like that story about Reverend Eugene Cho.
Exactly. His family's journey, poverty, migration from South Korea to the U.S. wasn't just hardship. He describes it as giving him a specific lens to see the world.
A unique perspective.
Right, and that perspective led him to what he calls an unexpected calling, becoming an advocate for people on the margins, fighting hunger through organizations like Bread for the World.
And he focuses on bipartisan solutions, right? Trying to bridge divides.
Yeah, which is interesting in itself how a personal journey across cultures can lead to work focused on finding common ground to create positive change.
So beyond individual stories like that, what are the broader benefits people report?
Consistently, people talk about gaining vital intercultural skills.
Yeah.
You just become much more understanding of cultural differences and maybe more understanding of human nature in general.
You see the patterns.
Yeah, and you definitely gain a deeper understanding of yourself, your own identity, what you truly value, what parts of your own culture you took for granted.
It builds resilience too, I imagine.
Incredible resilience. You're constantly pushed out of your comfort zone, forced to figure things out on your own in unfamiliar situations. That makes you stronger, more adaptable.
More open-minded.
Definitely. More empathetic towards different kinds of people, different life stories, and often just more independent. You've proven to yourself you can navigate tricky situations.
And sometimes you form a really deep connection with the place you lived.
Oh, yeah. That Canadian expat missing Japan talked about how it truly felt like home because she'd lived through significant life moments there. It becomes part of your story, part of your identity.
So these experiences, they really do widen your horizons. They change you.
Fundamentally.
Right.
And hopefully, as one source nicely put it, for the better. They give you this incredible ability to kind of stand between worlds, to understand different perspectives.
So when you boil it all down, whether you're just arriving somewhere new or navigating the return home, getting through these cultural shifts is, yeah, it's tough, no doubt about it. But it's also deeply, profoundly transformative.
Absolutely. These journeys, packed with both the shocks and the discoveries, they really do push you, mold you, and ultimately equip you with new eyes, new skills for seeing and being in the world.
So maybe here's something for you, our listener, to think about after hearing all this. How does encountering a different culture, maybe through travel or maybe just through hearing these kinds of stories, how does that change your own idea of what counts as normal? What parts of your own culture, the things you do without thinking every single day, have you maybe never really questioned? And how might seeing those things through the eyes of an outsider, someone from a completely different background, reveal something totally new to you about your own world?